Northern Montana Territory, late autumn 1886. While experienced frontier builders rushed to complete their cabins before the first snow, one immigrant was being called a fool. His crime? Building 2 walls where one would do. Anders Bjornsted, a Norwegian carpenter who'd arrived in the Milk River Valley just 18 months prior, was constructing something the local builders had never seen. Between his inner and outer log walls ran a 6-inch gap, a space his neighbors insisted was nothing but wasted timber and wasted labor. "You're burning daylight and good wood on air," John Weatherby, a respected master carpenter with 12 Montana winters under his belt, told him flatly. "That cavity won't heat. It won't insulate. It's dead space, and you're a dead fool for building it." But Bjornsted kept working. What he understood about thermal engineering, lessons carried from the frost-bound valleys of Scandinavia, would soon prove more valuable than a decade of American frontier experience. The question that haunted the settlement through that autumn was simple. Had this immigrant brought genuine innovation, or was he squandering resources on old-world superstition? The winter of 1887 would answer that question in the most brutal way imaginable. If you want to discover what happened when temperatures dropped to levels not seen in half a century, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below with your thoughts on traditional building techniques. Milk River Valley, Montana Territory, September 1886. The aspen leaves were turning gold, and every experienced builder in the territory knew what that meant. 6 weeks, maybe 8 if luck held, before the first hard freeze. Time was the enemy now, and every homesteader raced against it. Anders Bjornsted was not racing. He was building slowly, methodically, and, according to his neighbors, stupidly. His cabin site sat on a slight rise 3 miles south of the trading post, positioned to catch southern exposure while a stand of cottonwoods broke the north wind. Smart placement, the locals admitted. But what he was building on that smart site made no sense whatsoever. Bjornsted had felled 42 lodge pole pines, nearly double what a standard 16 by 20 cabin required. He'd stripped and notched them with obvious skill, his corners tight and true. But instead of raising a single wall of 8-inch logs, he was constructing 2 walls of 6-inch logs with a gap between them. 6 inches of nothing, Weatherby had observed, shaking his head. That's what you're building. 6 inches of wasted space that'll do exactly nothing when it's 20 below. The criticism wasn't just from Weatherby. Samuel Grant, who owned the largest ranch in the valley and had survived 19 Montana winters, rode out specifically to witness the absurdity. He sat his horse for a full 10 minutes, watching Bjornsted work, then finally spoke. "Son, I don't know what passes for sense in Norway, but here in Montana, we build walls that hold heat. You're building walls that hold air. Air don't keep a man warm." Bjornsted had paused, set down his draw knife, and met Grant's eyes. "In Gudbrandsdalen, my valley, we see -40 Fahrenheit most winters. We build this way there. It works." "This ain't Norway," Grant replied, "and you ain't in your valley. You're wasting timber and time, and come January, you'll be wasting both at my bunkhouse, begging for a corner by the stove." The Norwegian returned to his work without another word. But the story spread. Within a week, Bjornsted's cabin was the joke of the territory. The fool immigrant's folly, they called it. Men made bets on how many days into winter before he abandoned it. The over-under was set at 14 days past first snow. What they didn't understand, what Bjornsted tried once to explain before giving up, was that the 6-inch cavity wasn't empty. As each section of double wall went up, he carefully packed the gap with a mixture of sawdust from the lumber mill, dried moss gathered from the riverbank, and clay dug from a deposit 2 miles east. The fill wasn't random. He tamped it in layers, ensuring no air pockets, no settling spaces, no thermal bridges where cold could penetrate. He'd calculated the thermal resistance, though he wouldn't have used that term. In his mind, it was simply holding AV varm, the holding of warmth. A 6-inch log wall alone might hold heat for 2, maybe 3 hours after a fire burned down. But 2 6-inch walls with proper fill between them, that could hold warmth 6, 7, even 8 hours. Long enough to sleep through a Montana night without waking to feed the fire. Long enough to mean the difference between survival and catastrophe. By late October, with the first dusting of snow on the peaks, Bjornstad's walls were complete. His neighbors' cabins were also complete. Single-wall structures of 8 to 10-inch logs, solid and proven, built the way men had been building them for decades across the frontier. The waiting game had begun. What bothered the local builders most wasn't just that Bjornstad was doing it differently. It was that he seemed so certain he was right. John Weatherby, in particular, took it almost personally. He'd built 23 cabins in Montana and Wyoming territories, and every one had kept its occupants alive through winters that killed lesser structures. His method was proven. 10-inch logs when available, 8-inch minimum, notch tight, chinked with moss and mud, a proper stone fireplace with a throat that drew clean. Simple, effective, reliable. Bjornstad's approach violated everything Weatherby knew. The double walls required 40% more timber. The packing process added 3 full weeks to the construction timeline. The additional labor meant burning through supplies and facing winter with depleted reserves. And for what? An untested theory from a foreign land that might not even apply to Montana's particular cold. It's not just foolish, Weatherby told a group gathered at the trading post in early November. It's dangerous. He spent resources on experimental nonsense instead of on proven shelter. When the real cold comes, and it will come, that fancy double wall won't matter a damn if he's starved because he spent his grain money on extra timber. The technical arguments seemed sound. A 10-inch log wall provided substantial mass, roughly 40 pounds per square foot of wall surface. That mass absorbed heat from the fire and radiated it back slowly. Proven. Reliable. Why complicate it? Bjornstad's design, by contrast, replaced that solid mass with a composite structure, 2 thinner walls with fill between. On paper, using Weatherby's logic, it seemed obviously inferior. Less solid would meant less thermal mass, which meant less heat storage. The only question was how badly it would perform. Samuel Grant, whose opinion carried weight in the valley, had done his own calculations. A standard cabin of Bjornstad's dimensions, 16 by 20 feet, required approximately 1 cord of firewood per week in deep winter. Grant's own larger ranch house consumed 3 cords weekly when temperatures dropped below zero. Bjornstad's cabin, if his design failed as expected, might need even more due to heat escaping through that dead air cavity. He'll burn through 4 cords a week trying to keep that double-walled icebox warm, Grant predicted. Mark my words, by February, he'll have stripped every dead tree within a mile of his place. The criticism intensified as November brought the first sustained freezes. Nighttime temperatures dropped to 15 degrees Fahrenheit, then 10, then 5. Light snow covered the ground. Every cabin's chimney sent up steady smoke as fires burned against the growing cold. Bjornstad's chimney, observers noted, seemed to smoke less than others. But that, Weatherby explained, just meant the fool was freezing to save firewood. Pride before a fall, he said. He'll learn. What no one knew, because Bjornstad kept himself and didn't invite visitors, was what was happening inside that double-walled structure. The composite design was performing exactly as he'd calculated. The outer wall took the brunt of the wind and cold. The 6-inch cavity, filled with sawdust clay moss mixture, created what modern engineers would call a high R-value barrier. In period terms, it simply didn't let heat escape. The inner wall, warmed by the firebox, radiated heat into the living space while losing minimal energy to the exterior. If you're fascinated by how traditional engineering principles challenge conventional wisdom, hit that like button, subscribe for more frontier innovation stories, and drop a comment about what you'd have bet on, the proven method or the immigrant's gamble. The result was measurable, though Bjornstad had no thermometer to prove it. His evening fire, built around 6 o'clock and allowed to burn down by 9, kept the cabin interior comfortable until well past dawn. He was burning approximately half a cord per week, half of what Grant had predicted, and significantly less than his neighbor's consumption. But without data, without visitors, without proof, the valley's judgment remained unchanged. Anders Bjornstad was a fool building a folly, and winter would expose him. By mid-December, as temperatures continued to drop and the snow deepened, The betting pool at the trading post had grown. The question was no longer if Bjornsted would fail, but when and how dramatically. Then came January. January 9th, 1887. The barometer at Fort Assiniboine, 40 miles southeast, began dropping precipitously. Old-timers who'd wintered in the territory since the 1860s watched the sky with growing unease. The signs were all wrong. Too still, too clear, too cold, too fast. By January 11th, temperatures across northern Montana had plunged to -15 Fahrenheit. Uncomfortable, but manageable. Cabins stayed warm, livestock huddled in barns. Life continued with the cautious rhythm of deep winter. Then, on the night of January 12th, something changed. The cold that descended on the Milk River Valley that night was unlike anything the current generation of settlers had experienced. By dawn on January 13th, the official reading at Fort Assiniboine was -38 Fahrenheit. Unofficial readings closer to the valley settlements suggested -42. It was the coldest temperature recorded in the region in 50 years. John Weatherby's cabin, solid and proven, became a desperate fortress. He burned wood continuously, stoking his fire every 45 minutes throughout the day and night. Even so, frost formed on the interior walls by the second night. The cabin's interior temperature, measured by a thermometer he'd brought from Pennsylvania, hovered between 43 and 48 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on proximity to the fire. Survivable, but brutally uncomfortable, and sustainable only as long as his woodpile lasted. Samuel Grant's ranch house, larger and with a massive stone fireplace, fared better, but consumed wood at a frightening rate. His crew burned through half a cord in a single day, triple the normal winter consumption. Grant himself spent 4 hours one afternoon helping split frozen logs, the work necessary to keep the firebox fed. Across the valley, the story was the same. Families burned furniture when wood piles ran low. 3 elderly settlers were brought to Grant's ranch house, their own cabins too cold to be safe. A family with young children spent 48 hours essentially living in front of their fireplace, rotating positions to ensure everyone got warmth. The cold held for 6 days. 6 days of temperatures that never rose above -25 Fahrenheit, with nights dropping to -40 or below. It was the kind of cold that killed livestock in their barns, froze water solid in covered wells, and made the simple act of checking a trap line potentially fatal. On the morning of January 18th, as the temperature finally began to climb back toward merely brutal levels, Samuel Grant organized a welfare check. Several families hadn't been seen since the cold snap began, and there was real concern about casualties. The riders fanned out across the valley. When 2 of them approached Bjornsted's cabin, they expected the worst. The chimney showed smoke, but light smoke, not the thick continuous output of a fire being desperately fed. They knocked. Bjornsted answered promptly, looking surprised to see them, but not distressed. He wore a single wool shirt. No coat. No hat. No visible suffering. "We come to check if you needed help," one rider said. "Help? No, I am well. Cold outside, yes?" They asked to come in. What they found inside defied everything they thought they understood about frontier survival. The cabin was warm, genuinely, comfortably warm. A small fire burned in the firebox, no larger than an evening cooking fire. The interior walls showed no frost. A thermometer Bjornsted had fashioned from a glass tube and mercury, crude but functional, indicated 68 degrees Fahrenheit near the center of the room, dropping to perhaps 62 near the walls. 68 degrees. In -40 weather, with a fire that looked barely adequate for cooking. The riders stood speechless. Then one asked the obvious question, "How much were you burning?" Bjornsted walked them to his woodshed. His supply was largely intact. By his estimate, he'd burned perhaps 3/4 of a cord during the entire 6-day freeze, less than what some cabins had burned in a single day. The math was undeniable. Bjornsted's double-wall design, mocked as wasteful and foolish, was performing at roughly 300% efficiency compared to conventional cabins. He was maintaining genuinely comfortable temperatures while consuming a fraction of the fuel. The riders left to report their findings. By evening, a steady stream of visitors appeared at Bjornstad's door. Men who'd bet against him, men who'd called him a fool, men who now wanted to understand what they'd witnessed. Bjornstad explained patiently. The outer wall absorbed the cold and wind. The filled cavity provided massive resistance to heat transfer. The cold cannot reach through 6 inches of packed material, he said. The inner wall, warmed by even a modest fire, radiated heat efficiently into the space. The entire structure worked as one integrated system, each component supporting the others. In my valley, in Gudbrandsdalen, he told them, we learned this through many generations. The first builders, they tried single walls. People died. They tried thicker walls. Better, but still people suffered. Then someone tried this, 2 walls with fill. And people lived comfortably. We did not know the science words for why it works. We only knew that it works. By late January, as the temperature finally moderated to normal winter levels, the valley's consensus had completely reversed. Bjornstad wasn't a fool. He was a genius who'd brought genuinely superior technology to Montana. The transformation in the valley's attitude toward Anders Bjornstad was immediate and absolute. The man they'd mocked 4 months earlier was now the most sought-after builder in the territory. By March 1887, before spring thaw had even begun, Bjornstad had contracts to consult on 7 new cabin builds. Each would incorporate his double-wall design. The clients included John Weatherby, who approached with genuine humility. I was wrong. I'd like to learn the right way, if you'll teach me. Samuel Grant went further. He commissioned Bjornstad to retrofit his ranch house with double walls on the north and west exposures, the directions from which Montana's worst cold arrived. The project took 6 weeks that summer and cost Grant nearly $300 in materials and labor. But when winter 1887 to 88 arrived, his fuel consumption dropped by 48% and the comfort level increased dramatically. The technical principles Bjornstad had brought from Norway spread across the Milk River Valley and beyond. Within 2 years, 17 cabins within a 50-mile radius had incorporated double-wall construction. Within 5 years, the technique had reached settlements as far south as Great Falls and as far east as Fort Benton. The economic impact was substantial. A conventional cabin might consume 12 to 15 cords of wood per winter season. Bjornstad's design reduced that to 6 to 8 cords, a savings of 6 to 9 cords per structure per season. In a region where a cord of split firewood represented roughly 20 hours of labor, the savings in time and effort were transformative. The social impact was equally significant. Families using double-wall cabins reported better health through winter months. The stable interior temperatures reduced respiratory illnesses common in cabins that swung from overheated near the fire to freezing at the walls. Children could sleep in their own beds rather than crowding near the hearth. Elderly residents faced dramatically reduced risk during cold snaps. By 1890, a territorial survey noted that settlements in the Milk River region showed notably lower winter mortality rates compared to similar settlements elsewhere in Montana. While multiple factors contributed to this, the survey specifically mentioned superior insulation techniques introduced by Scandinavian immigrants as a significant factor. Bjornstad himself became a respected elder of the community. He trained 6 apprentices in his methods between 1887 and 1892. He never charged for consultations, though he accepted payment for actual construction work. When asked why he freely shared his knowledge, he said simply, "In my valley, the old men taught the young men, and everyone survived. This is how it should be." The vindication extended beyond personal success. Bjornstad's experience forced the valley's builders to confront an uncomfortable truth. Their certainty about proven methods had blinded them to superior approaches. The expertise they'd accumulated through American frontier experience was real and valuable, but it wasn't comprehensive. Other cultures, other environments, other traditions had solved similar problems in different and sometimes better ways. John Weatherby, in particular, became an advocate for what he called listening before judging. At a territorial builders conference in 1889, he told Bjornstad's story as a cautionary tale. "We nearly let a man freeze out of pride and ignorance. He offered us knowledge, and we called it foolishness. The only fools were those who assumed they knew everything worth knowing. The double wall technique didn't replace all traditional construction. It was more labor-intensive and required more timber, making it impractical in regions where wood was scarce. But in northern Montana, where timber was available and winters were brutal, it became the preferred method for anyone building for long-term habitation. By the early 20th century, as commercial insulation materials became available, the specific technique of sawdust clay moss fill evolved. But the core principle, that trapped airspace and proper insulation dramatically improved thermal performance, became standard knowledge. What Bjornsted had brought from Norway in 1885 had merged with American building practices to create something new and demonstrably better. The legacy extended beyond technical knowledge. Bjornsted's story became a teaching parable in the valley. When newcomers arrived with unfamiliar methods, or when young builders proposed innovations, the community's response shifted. Instead of reflexive skepticism, there was genuine curiosity. "Remember Bjornsted's cabin" became a local saying, a reminder that wisdom could come from unexpected sources, and that traditional knowledge deserved respect rather than dismissal. Anders Bjornsted died in 1904 at age 67. His original cabin, still standing and still remarkably warm, was preserved by his family and later donated to the Montana Historical Society. It stands today as a testament to vernacular engineering, the sophisticated knowledge developed through generations of people solving real problems in harsh environments. The winter of 1887 had proven something the valley needed to learn. Dismissing traditional knowledge as primitive often revealed not the ignorance of those who practiced it, but the arrogance of those who refused to learn. If this story of immigrant wisdom overcoming frontier prejudice resonates with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more forgotten history, and comment below with examples of traditional knowledge that deserves more respect in modern times.